Politics has trumped economics for too long now, but can Budget 2014 really reset those equations? The BJP, of course, is armed with a huge electoral mandate and virtually has no opposition, at least in the Lok Sabha. The question then is, can it take the bold, brave measures, or will Modi's men continue to be buckled under political pressure? Arun Jaitley is, of course, up against history and a truckload of expectations. The question then is, can the finance minister keep the Modi juggernaut rolling? Welcome to the Politics of Budget 2014 on the Big Reset, right here on ET Now with me, Supriya Srinath. A very eminent panel joins me right here on this show. NK Singh of the BJP, Panda of the Biju Janata Dal, and of course Manish Tewari of the Congress Party. Thanks each one of you for being here and giving your views on what many people believe is a make or break fiscal exercise for Indian economy. Mr. Singh, let me begin with you because you represent the ruling party here. It's a very decisive mandate as far as the BJP is concerned. Do you think your party will have the elbow room to really bite the bullet on big political or economic reforms, or will political pressure continue to call the shots?
Well, I remain sanguine and optimistic that Prime Minister will not like to allow this historic opportunity to be frittered by short-term pressures. Of course, there are some exogenous events which have, as they say, taken everyone by surprise. The extent of the failure of the monsoon and its implications on agricultural prices, on inflation, on purchasing power of the rural economy, on employment of the rural economy, and of course events abroad in terms of the spillover effects of Iraq and its likely impact on medium-term behavior of crude oil prices. These are events which no doubt have been somewhat more accentuated than when the initial planning for the budget would have started. But I think that by and large, I would say that the budgetary calculus will remain intact. The stock markets continue to be very, very optimistic. This is a great opportunity for a significant disinvestment program to make up losses on account of subsidies elsewhere. And I think, therefore, the broad strategy would remain in place. It would be a strong pointer to revival of investor confidence.
You, of course, had prior experience in the North Bloc, and which is why you talk about the two big challenges, the Iraq crisis and inflation and monsoon concerns. But Mr. Panda, if I may ask you, do you think the decisive mandate gives Mr. Modi and his men the elbow room to take the big, tough decisions?
Well, clearly the mandate is decisive. Let us recognize that in 30 years, this is the first time that there has been a single party majority in Parliament. So that is indeed quite a big shift from what we have been used to in the past several elections, in the past several Parliament. The Prime Minister has repeatedly said so. He has repeatedly said that he is going to take the tough decisions. I think you've seen some of that already happening. So clearly the political capital, if you will, today exists. How far this will be taken forward in terms of taking all the decisions necessary to set the economy on the right track particularly, I think we'll have to see how it pans out.
All right, talking about the political capital that does exist, according to Mr. Panda, Mr. Tewari, do you believe the government has the elbow room to really bite the bullet on the big, bold decisions, the big, bold reforms that await Indian economy?
Well, insofar as we are concerned, we are prepared to give room for both the elbows, but what the BJP government really has to keep in mind is that there are commitments which they have made to the people in the course of their electoral campaign. And we do expect that those commitments must be honored. They need to walk the talk. And if you recall that over the past 10 years, when they were in the opposition, whenever any tough economic measures were to be taken, you would hear very high decibel rhetoric emanating out of the leadership of the Bharatiya Janata Party. So therefore, in the past 1 month, you've seen whether it is inflation, whether it is other macroeconomic measures, this government really has not been able to come up with a game plan forget measuring up. So therefore, we'll have to wait and see as to what do they really have in the budget. But the moot point is, would they walk the talk in terms of their fundamental commitment to lessen the burden on the Aam Aadmi, or would you find a complete reversal from that position? And that obviously would then lead to its own political implications.
Mr. Tewari, I wasn't really expecting a pat on the back from the Congress as far as the BJP government is concerned, but that does raise a very important point. And Mr. Singh, I'm going to throw that question to you. The rollback of the railway fare hike that happened, it was a sound economic rationale, a partial rollback, and the indecision on gas prices. This does remind one of the UPA days, very, very reminiscent of that. What has changed then?
No, frankly speaking, I think that the decision on the railway fare of across the board of 14%, plus has been an exceedingly bold decision. It is a good pointer that far more abiding railway reforms are still awaited and hopefully will be articulated in the railway budget or in other ways as over the coming months. I think the partial rollback in respect of this are only for suburban fares up to 80 kilometers has been something which I do not think really upsets the program and the progress or reforming the railway sector in a very significant way, and not too much should be read into it. Of course, there are these, all governments cannot be static. You have to obviously factor public opinion into account. And I do not think that what has been done in a small tinkering is going to upset the broad directions of railway reforms. On gas prices, I think that the doubts were not so much in terms of what it would mean in terms of an increase in power tariff or in terms of fertilizer subsidy, as indeed the methodology itself.
All right, fair point. The argument there is being sensitive to public opinion. But Mr. Tewari, if I may come to you, do you think the time has finally arrived in Indian politics that politicians can set across their political differences and have some kind of a consensus going on tough decisions like a cut in fertilizer subsidy, market linking of fuel prices, and measures which even your government promoted, really?
Supriya, that initiative has to come from the government. If we go by our experience, it's been a very, very bitter experience. Whenever we stretched the hand and wanted to have a consensus on certain critical economic questions, the hand of friendship was spurned. Rather than, not only was it spurned, but it was very rudely thrust back at us. So therefore, we are a responsible opposition, but the initiative really lies with the government. And in fact, what you've seen is on critical economic issues, even where the UPA had taken decisions, where the Cabinet Committee on Economic Affairs, Cabinet Committee on Investments had taken decisions, and they were put on hold due to the model code of conduct. Even on those questions, this government has started rolling back. So, there is no clarity within the government as to what it really wants to do. In fact, I have not been able to discern over the past 30 days, with due respects to them, that what's their big picture.
All right, from one voice of opposition on to the other, Mr. Panda, how confident are you? Or do you really think political parties will set aside political differences and support the government on issues like this? Cutting a fertilizer subsidy, market linking of fuel prices. What is seemingly said to be bold decisions?
Well, look, we don't have an all-party national government, so I don't think we should expect that every party should toe the line of what the government is doing. We have already heard some parties, both inside the coalition which runs the government today, as well as those in the opposition. Many parties have objected to these raises, these cost increases, and tough decisions will always face some political pushback. But I think this has to be seen in the context, again, of there being a full majority for the party in government and their coalition. So they are certainly capable of facing that pushback. And secondly, as I was saying, for a party like ours, for instance, we are in the opposition, but we want to play a positive and a constructive role.
So what you're essentially suggesting here is that at a broad consensus level, the consensus or meeting of minds on reforms remains elusive.
Well, I wouldn't go quite that far. I would say that, let me clarify, I would say certainly there will be opposition to some of the tough decisions, but I think this mandate very clearly signifies that the Prime Minister does have the mandate at least to take some tough decisions, if not all of them, because his campaigning was all throughout about setting the economy right. He's always made it very clear that setting the economy right is his #1 priority, and that is what has got the votes. So he does have the political capital. So on the one hand, we should not expect complete unanimity across the political spectrum, but on the other hand, I don't think the pushback is such that a sensitive government and a determined government cannot face.
All right, a sensitive, determined government, and which is why the question goes back to Mr. Singh here. Mr. Singh, your Prime Minister has spoken about bitter pill. How much of that has to be gulped down collectively by political parties? And do you believe people to come together on these sensitive reforms?
Well, let me say this, that when the Prime Minister has spoken of the bitter pill, he did not say bitter pill to be swallowed in one gulp. Because I think that all reforms and the bitter pill itself has to be administered in doses which would find broader public support and broader support across the political spectrum.
All right, you don't have to gulp down all that bitter pill in one shot. It can be small dosage as well. We've got to take a short breather here. We come back and discuss the fiscal slippage versus fiscal deficit and, of course, the growth equation in a moment from now. So good to be back with you on the politics of Budget 2014, and as promised, let's talk all about fiscal discipline now. Mr. Singh, the question really comes to you for two reasons. You've had prior experience at North Block, and of course you're a part of the BJP's economic think tank. There is a certain amount of fetish when it comes to fiscal deficit, to meeting that last decimal point of fiscal discipline. The question then is, will there be more political acceptance according to your fiscal slippage if it's done in the quest of reviving growth?
You know, that is a classic million-dollar question on which there are no absolute answers. There are no fixed paradigms. I'm myself not a fiscal fetishist, as many would be, much less a monetary fetishist in that sense of the term. But I think that you really require a combination of monetary and fiscal policy which really combines the virtues of moderating inflationary trends and of fostering economic growth. By the way, among the other things, the quality of the fiscal adjustment is as important as the adjustment itself. For instance, if you would have noticed that the bulk of the burden of fiscal adjustment in the last 1 or 2 years have fallen on capital expenditure, because it's a capital expenditure which has been cut rather decisively by the former finance minister. And I think that that has a very deleterious impact on economic growth. So I think that in trying to adhere to the path of fiscal rectitude, one must look equally at the quality of fiscal adjustment, because that's what the investor community would also look at. And in a broader sense of the term, the virtues of combining growth with fiscal stability, they are the two flip sides of the same coin.
Mr. Tewari, you know, the quality of fiscal deficit brings me back to the Congress, because so much of debate happened when Mr. Chidambaram did meet that 4.8%. The question then is, Mr. Singh likes to call fiscal discipline and growth two sides of the same coin. What's your argument on this? Should one stop fretting over fiscal deficit and instead focus on growth? Isn't that an acceptable argument?
Well, I don't really agree with this fundamental hypothesis that fiscal consolidation and the slide in growth are really two sides of the same coin. In fact, fiscal consolidation is very essential, because you can't have a government which is living beyond its means, and then it is borrowing from the market, which then squeezes the room for private sector to really access those funds. So therefore, to let the fisc slide, or to let the fundamentals sort of ease themselves out so that growth can be spurred. I'm not sure, Supriya, whether that's a linear equation at all. So we would expect that the red lines which our government had drawn, the 10-point agenda for fiscal consolidation that we had put in place, that should be adhered to by this government, and they should come up with some innovative ways of kick-starting growth.
Mr. Panda, I see you smiling. Which side of the red line are you on? The one which frets over fiscal discipline, or the one that does not?
There are again several factors at play. If we allow the fisc to slip, then there are many repercussions. One of the repercussions is that that it has an impact on inflation. It has an impact on our exchange rates of the rupee, all of which have impacts, because we We import a lot of our petroleum requirements. So you can't just take a single-sided decision. There are no shortcuts. I think we do have to face up to the fact that there are several years of bad decisions which have accumulated, and they have to be faced up to. And you can't just take a shortcut and allow the fisc to slip and set right some things, because it will come back to bite you.
A fair point. I want to take a breather away from growth and fiscal discipline and talk about taxes, because that has really plagued the minds of India and global investors. Mr. Singh, the BJP has talked about ending the tax terror regime. You've used those phrases even in the manifesto. The question then is, I want to talk to you particularly about retrospective taxation. How limited is the government's elbow room as far as removing that very controversial legislation is concerned? How are you going to steer through the ongoing disputes?
So I think that what the government needs to come out is the articulation of the policy, which is contained in the BJP's manifesto, which is contained in the first address of the President, which is contained in other public pronouncements of the Prime Minister and the Finance Minister, that somewhat adversarial, oppressive tax tyranny about which people talk about, that I think needs to be laid to rest. And I think the broad principle of the rule of law needs re-articulation. Of course, in regard to the ongoing disputes on some of the retrospective taxation, that I think would really require a settlement outside the change of law.
Mr. Tewari, has the Congress's position changed on this matter, considering you're now across the Treasury benches and not on them? Because your Finance Minister tried very hard to undo the damage. Mr. Chidambaram did try to smoke the peace pipe with Vodafone. That wasn't to be.
Well, if you recall, when Mr. Chidambaram became Finance Minister, he put both the retrospective taxation as well as the general avoidance rules, the GAR, on a hold. So therefore, if this government is, wants to come up with a strategy with regard to retrospective taxation, we'll have to really wait and see as to what the fine print says. But on a fundamental principle, I agree with you that if you send out signals, which unfortunately got sent out while we were there, that there is instability in the tax regime or judicial pronouncements are not sacrosanct, it does not sort of measure or square up well, with our image as an investment destination.
All right. On that note, we take a very quick breather here on the politics of budget, come back and discuss the changing contours of the center-state relationship and how that impacts Budget 2014. Good to be back with you on the politics of Budget 2014. It's time to talk about the path-breaking indirect tax reform, the GST. Mr. Singh, your government has gone headlong into it. Positive vibes that are coming from North Bloc, plenty of positive talk. How hopeful are you of a breakthrough on this very, very crucial reform that will perhaps change the whole taxation space?
Well, certainly, I am very optimistic. I'm optimistic that the moment is right, the configuration is right, to be able to articulate a short-term credible program on the introduction of the GST. And I think that the consultations which Mr. Jaitley has had with several states really underscore the optimism which is embedded in your question, that we will see a decisive forward movement in regard to the GST in the coming months.
Mr. Tewari, the BJP played hardball when your Prime Minister and even the Finance Minister tried to push this game-changing reform. Will the Congress's party's position be one of support as far as this legislation is concerned, considering you were the ones who were championing for its pass-through?
Well, I think it is delicious irony that those people who had linked political and administrative decisions to GST going forth have now to carry the same gauntlet. Look, on goods and service tax, we've always believed that it is something good for the economy. If the GST goes through, it is going to spur the GDP on its own by almost a percentage point. So therefore, the Congress state governments have always been very constructive on the question of GST.
Mr. Panda, your friend Mr. Tewari calls it delicious irony. Which side of the debate are you on? Are you hopeful of a breakthrough on the GST?
I am. I think I'm cautiously optimistic that there can be movement on the GST front. This is something that would make an enormous difference to the landscape of our taxation regime in the country. And I have always said, apart from the aspect of federalism in general, in particular with the GST, central governments need to sell ideas. They can't thrust it down the throats of state governments. They can't just announce something which on paper is a good idea and expect that everybody will accept it. Ideas need to be sold. In the past, we have had examples that because central governments have won elections, they felt that they don't need to justify any of their policies, and it hasn't worked. I think we should appreciate the fact that immediately on taking charge, the finance minister has stepped right into this matter, and he has convened a meeting of the state government finance ministers. It will require proactivity from the central government, and the kind of steps that are being taken initially are encouraging, and that's something that should have been done years ago.
That really brings me to my last topic, and that is the changing centre-state equation. Mr. Singh, Prime Minister Modi has spoken about changing the federal structure of India, making states a part of the whole agenda. The question is, you from Bihar, you've seen how acrimonious the equations between two leaders can really be, Mr. Nitish Kumar at one hand and Mr. Prime Minister on the other. The question then is, can there be a possible partnership between the centre and the states, given that most times they're on collision course?
Look, let me be honest that I think that some of the embedded institutional mechanisms which are contained in the Constitution, namely like for instance the Centre State Council, that has remained dormant. There is hardly any meaningful consultation between the centre and the states. I think the Prime Minister is right that for far too long the states have just been the recipient of decisions unilaterally taken by the states without adequacy of consultations. Not making the states important stakeholders in our growth dynamics has been one of the important flaws of a model in which it has been a model driven by the preferences of the central government.
Mr. Panda, do you believe the kind of equation that the Prime Minister is talking about is realistically possible between centre and state in India?
Again, I am cautiously hopeful on this front. Speaking from personal experience, when we met him, that is all 20 BJD MPs led by our party president Shri Naveen Patnaik, he specifically used the words that the country can only progress if the states progress, and that he wanted to work in collaboration and partnership. Now, this is not something new that he's saying. He's been saying this for many years, and as a Chief Minister, he understands both sides of the coin. So that's what gives me hope that we can actually look forward to working in partnership.
All right, let's get the last word from absolute opposition of the BJP, however minuscule they are in numbers as far as the Lok Sabha is concerned. Mr. Tewari, do you believe this change in equation between the centre and the state, despite different political ideologies, is realistically possible in India?
The reports that you hear, the gossip which goes around, is talking about a specter of centralization. And I often wonder as to how you are going to have a hugely centralized central government and then try and reach out to the states in order to at least sound federalistic. I see this as a huge contradiction in the working style of the government. So therefore, my own sense would be that you would see a far more concentration of power, a far more centralization in Delhi, but a lot of glib talk and a lot of breeze being shot on the question of federalism and lip service to the whole conception of India as a federal nation.
All right, on that note, completely timed out here on the politics of budget, we at ET now believe that economic reality cannot ever be bereft of politics, but I hope politics stops playing an active role in Indian economy as much as it has in the last few years. Thanks very much for being with us, each one of you.